The Catholic Morning Show.
The problem is anytime I talk about being from a small town or anything involved in that, my mental song that plays is Our Town by Iris McDermott and Iris DeMint, excuse me, and that can get you all weepy very quick. My Town, excuse me. But thank you for giving me a second to say thank you and tip the hat to important people in my life. And again, just one more time, thank you to all those small town newspapers that meant such a difference to people throughout their life. Good morning here on the Catholic Morning Show. Bo Bonner with Elise Kerr and Brady Grimm. All of us happy you're with us here on the Catholic Morning Show. On the second half of the show, Mary Carmen, Perpetual Pilgrim National Eucharistic Pilgrimage is who we'll get a chance to talk to. Right now, let's turn to our first guest of the day, Todd Walatka, teaching professor and assistant chair for graduate studies in the Department of Theology at Notre Dame. He also chairs the Romero Studies Working Group at the Kellogg Institute. He's talking today about his book, Mission to Love, Great Spiritual Teachers, 30 Days with Oscar Romero. Todd, thank you for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Wonderful to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, of course, most of your work, you have not most, but you have a lot, right? Oscar Romero plays a definite important role in your scholarship and what you do. But here with Ave Maria Press, they have these 30 days with the saints. And so 30 days with Oscar Romero, a tight, easy book to use in order to get into your spiritual life. What was the goal and what appealed to you about writing a popular book like this?
Yeah, so I've taught Romero in my classes at all levels for a number of years, and I don't have anybody else that I've seen sort of impact students so significantly, kind of wherever they're coming from. And so the chance to help people encounter his witness, but kind of in that mode of prayer, to help people kind of slowly engage and encounter him kind of over the 30 days. I've seen, again, the impact on my students, and so the possibility of bringing it to others was just really exciting.
Absolutely wonderful. So when you think about Romero and what he's known for, we got a chance to talk with someone a few weeks ago about this. There was a movie about Romero, he's a martyr for justice. People know that. But what does this book reveal about his spiritual life and how that ties in to maybe more well-known aspects of his life?
Yeah, I really see two things at the heart of his spirituality. I think that for Romero, the heart of the Christian life is to learn to truly see the dignity of every single person. And then second, what he calls to incarnate that. So the incarnation is that we believe the Son of God took flesh. He became incarnate. And Romero says that our task is to incarnate the gospel, to truly to give it flesh in our life and in our world. And so for me, those are kind of the two pillars of his spirituality, that we are truly created and redeemed by Christ. And so we all have this, infinite dignity, but we struggle to see it. We struggle to live it. We struggle to actually experience one another's dignity and respond to that. And so the task is to really enflesh that in our world. And so the devotional really is a kind of slow meditation, slow guide to living that out.
Well, so Romero he's very much known for being a powerful homilist, especially in key moments in his life. So how did you take his homiletic brilliance and then distill that to a spiritual retreat for 30 days?
He is famous for his homilies, which sometimes would go over an hour and a half. So that made it extra difficult to distill it down. But luckily, he's also incredibly quotable. He didn't write out any of his homilies, which is actually pretty incredible. But he had this way of he was an incredible speaker. And so, actually the main challenge is going from, hundreds and hundreds of possible passages to get it down to just 30 to help people really encounter his witness.
Absolutely. Well, when it comes to this idea of someone who is known for their work in the realm of social justice and martyrdom and their public witness, sometimes that makes us eclipse or misunderstand the importance of things like the prayer life. So what about his prayer life, and how did that ground the public witness that we're so well aware of?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's important to remember for Romero who he drew close to. That was kind of the heart of his mission. And he was always close to God in prayer. I always have his most famous words come in his final Sunday Mass when he tells the soldiers to stop the repression. And people don't realize he spent the entire previous night up in prayer at the Blessed Sacrament. He was was sort of struggling with what he should do, and he spent that entire night in prayer. And so he drew close to God, and he drew close to his people. To read his diaries, to read his homilies, he's constantly with his people. And so those two sort of pillars are sort of at the heart of his work.
Well, what might surprise readers about Romero's relationship with Christ? If they get to know him more in that regard, what we come in a lot of times with predictions about what we assume a blessed or a saint is like. So what do you think surprises people most upon encountering him more deeply?
What I have found, and this is actually, I think, he's a saint for our time, because we live in a time of polarization, and actually so did he, and he knew that. And what I have found as my students and friends encounter Romero is what they find so surprising is no matter where they're coming from, they immediately feel at home. That whatever they hold most dear, like drawing close to Christ, a life of prayer, a life of social justice, obedience to the Pope, like whatever they sort of hold most dear, they find it in him. And then they immediately find things that make them uncomfortable. That they find things that, not that they necessarily disagree with, but that they don't tend to emphasize, and he loves those things too. And so for me, Romero sort of holds together a fullness of Catholic faith, that in Christ we are called to this fullness of life, and we tend to narrow it, and he expands it. And so that's actually, I've always found people find so surprising, like how quickly they feel at home and how quickly they feel challenged.
Oh, a good 1-2 punch, especially here in Holy Week. How does Mission to Love then speak to people who feel just overwhelmed by things in the world? Injustice, division, suffering in the world. It's something that when we open our hearts in prayer to take on that heart of flesh for others, it can begin to feel just like too much of a burden. So how is it that Bishop Romero helps us precisely with that?
Yeah, so actually I had this very much in mind when I wrote the book. And so the book really starts by just drawing back to the very foundations. Like, how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a child of God? Do you draw close to God each day? Do you seek God's will each day? Do you see yourself called to both prayer and action? So it's sort of just kind of coming back to that core. And then sort of expanding out from there. And so I think so much of the paralysis we have is, we each feel so responsible for everything going on in the world. And the key is to sort of come back to that sort of foundational point. And then, of course, feel called, but then sort of discerning something more specific from that.
Well, in that regard, too, as an expansion of that. So if we feel overwhelmed, but then we, like you said, we take to heart the idea that there is something I am called to do each and every day, how does that work out in the concrete, right? Like on the day-to-day level, how is it that St. Romero helps us think about how I am going to live this out in my spiritual life, in my life among others, in a practical, enfleshed way?
Yeah. So he's going to give us certain ideas and principles and foundations, to be reading Scripture, to look for those who are suffering. But one of my favorite lines in Romero, he says this a number of times, he says, my preaching cannot be in El Salvador in 1978 as it would be in Africa, as it would be in some other time. And so he makes very clear to follow him can't be just to repeat him, that there's a call to each one of us to sort of mature faith. And mature faith means to discern what our time needs, to discern what our community needs, what our family needs. And so he can't sort of replace the responsibility upon each one of us to discern God's particular calling, even as, again, like the dignity of every person, the option for the poor, for the vulnerable, for the marginalized. These are going to be part of every Christian life. But what that looks like, that's sort of discerned in community.
Well, and in that regard, too, of course, he stood up for the poor, those who were marginalized, those who were repressed by the government. He really, of course, ended his life because of his willingness to be prophetic and be a witness to the truth. So how does a 30-day retreat challenge us, right? 30 days retreats, they are for us, right? Like we go on retreat for our sake in our spiritual health and well-being, of course. But then how does that emanate outwards, particularly to those who are in need of help, those who are poor, and those who are precisely the people that Romero fought so hard and died in witnessing for?
Yeah, so, I mean, in some sense, this book's maybe a slightly different kind of retreat than most people are used to. I open it up. Day one is on his shout to conversion, how every single day we are called to draw closer to Christ and to sort of convert more fully. And as that develops in the book, it makes very clear, the struggle for justice, the struggle to defend human life is at the heart of the gospel. If we confess human dignity, that every single person has this dignity, what does it mean if we don't defend it? What does it mean if we don't respond to when it's being trampled upon, when human life is being disregarded? And so as it goes forward, and of course that's why he was killed, right? So over time, he increasingly took up this call to defend the marginalized, to defend those whose dignity was being effaced, and by whomever that was. And so as the retreat goes on, I think it becomes more and more challenging to the reader. But again, ideally on this kind of affirmation of kind of what makes us truly Catholic.
Well, before we let you go, I'm sure it's interesting for the listeners to hear. So someone who has done a lot of academic scholarship over a person like St. Oscar Romero, what was it like for your prayer life to consider these things in precisely the retreat format? How did that help you specifically in sort of reconsidering someone who's taken up a lot of your mental and scholarly efforts?
No, sir. This is actually one of the most pleasurable, best parts of working on Romero. I find that when I read him in the morning, I'm both doing academic work and I'm having sort of spiritual reading at the same time. There was actually when I was writing this book, Jesus' admonition, blessed are the peacemakers, was sort of going around in my head throughout the days, and some of these sort of passages from Romero, just when I was having interactions with colleagues or just thinking about my place in the world, like what does it mean to be a peacemaker? And a number of his passages just stuck with me for months and months and months. And so it definitely was one of the most nourishing books to write for my own prayer life and just my own life of discipleship. Absolutely
wonderful. Well, Todd, before we let you go, where can people find more of your work about Romero, about the other things that you're up to with Notre Dame?
Yeah, so my faculty webpage at Notre Dame, I have this book from Ave Maria Press, Mission to Love, and I also have a book that's an introduction to Romero's preaching, Words of Life, from Orbis Books. Those can all be found on Amazon and on the publisher web pages as well.
Absolutely wonderful. Todd Walatka, teaching professor and assistant chair for graduate studies in the Department of Theology at Notre Dame. The book is Mission to Love, 30 Days with Oscar Romero, out from Ave Maria Press. Todd, thank you for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Thank you so much.
Listen to the Catholic Morning Show weekdays at 7 a.m. Central on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, iowacatholicradio.com, or the Iowa Catholic Radio app.